Mother bear gives birth to 5 cubs, veterinarian shocked by what he saw. The sun barely peeked through the dense Appalachian trees, casting fragmented light on the forest floor. Deep in the wilderness, a bear named Luna lay in a hidden clearing, surrounded by silence. She had just given birth to 5 cubs, but something about this scene felt otherworldly. Dr. Nathan Cole, a seasoned wildlife veterinarian, had received an urgent call from the rangers. They described an unusual situation, though the details were vague. As Nathan approached the site with his team, nothing could have prepared him for what awaited. The first 3 cubs were normal, their fur soft and golden, their tiny bodies breathing steadily against their mother. The 4th cub, however, bore an inexplicable mark, a glowing crescent moon etched into its chest, pulsating faintly as though alive. Nathan's instincts told him this wasn't a simple anomaly but something far more significant. He knelt cautiously beside the mother bear, his hand trembling as he reached out to examine the newborn. Luna watched him with amber eyes, her calm demeanor almost unnerving. Then came the 5th. As the rangers and Nathan focused on the shimmering mark of the 4th cub, a faint sound drew their attention back to Luna. She shifted, and the final cub emerged. Only it wasn't a cub at all. Its fur glistened like liquid silver, and its eyes, impossibly bright and blue, locked onto Nathan's with an intensity that made his breath catch. It looked fragile yet radiant, as though it didn't entirely belong in this world. Nathan froze, overwhelmed by the impossibility of what he was seeing. "What do you think, Doc?" one of the rangers asked, breaking the heavy silence. Nathan stood, his mind spinning with questions he couldn't answer. The creature wasn't just unique, it was beyond anything science could explain. Luna didn't growl or retreat but instead nudged the strange newborn closer to her side, her movements deliberate, almost protective. "This isn't natural," Nathan finally said, his voice shaky but firm. "It's either a miracle or something we've never encountered before." The forest around them seemed to hum with an unseen energy as if the world itself recognized the significance of this moment. Luna's unwavering trust in Nathan felt almost purposeful, as though she knew this was no ordinary birth. Nathan's thoughts spiraled. What was this creature and why now? Whatever the answer, one thing was clear. The balance of this untouched wilderness had just shifted, and nothing would ever be the same. Nathan returned to his clinic later that evening, his mind haunted by the impossible. The 5th cub rested in a secure enclosure, away from prying eyes. Luna had allowed him to take the strange newborn without resistance, though her watchful gaze lingered as he left. As Nathan reviewed the footage from his body camera, he noticed something he hadn't seen in the chaos of the moment. A faint shimmer in the air around the silver creature, like heat waves rising from pavement. It pulsed in sync with its breaths, a rhythm that felt eerily alive. Meanwhile, the local ranger station buzzed with nervous energy. Word had spread among the team about Luna's extraordinary litter, and though the details were kept vague, whispers of miracles and mutations filled the air. Ranger Sarah Thompson, a close friend of Nathan's, couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in her gut. "What did you bring back from that forest?" she asked when she stopped by his clinic that night. Nathan hesitated, glancing toward the locked enclosure. "Something that doesn't belong," he admitted softly. Inside the enclosure, the silver creature moved with uncanny grace for a newborn, its blue eyes tracking Nathan's every move. It didn't cry like the other cubs. Instead, it emitted faint, melodic hums that resonated in the small room. Nathan couldn't tell if it was a form of communication or something else entirely. He ran every test he could think of, blood work, imaging, reflex tests, but none of the results made sense. Its DNA, while partially ursine, contained sequences unlike anything in known databases. "This isn't just a mutation," he whispered to himself. "It's something entirely new." Outside, the forest seemed to stir. Reports of unusual animal behavior began trickling in, deer moving in tight formations, birds abandoning their nests en masse. Even predators like wolves and cougars were seen fleeing deeper into the woods. Nathan's phone buzzed with updates from the rangers, but one call stood out. "There's something strange happening in the eastern grove," Sarah said, her voice tense. "It's like the trees are whispering. You need to see this." Nathan left the clinic in a hurry, the silver creature's melodic hum still echoing in his ears. As he drove toward the grove, the night felt heavier, the stars dimmer. When he arrived, Sarah was waiting, her flashlight cutting through the dark. "Look at this," she said, pointing to the ground. A faint, glowing pattern, identical to the crescent moon on the fourth cub's chest, was etched into the soil, pulsing with a light that seemed to sync with the creature's distant hum. Nathan knelt, his heart racing. "This isn't random," he murmured. "It's a message. And whatever it means, we're not ready for it." The next morning, Nathan awoke to a flood of missed calls and messages from Sarah. As he rubbed the sleep from his eyes, her last voicemail chilled him to the bone. "Nathan, there's more. The patterns, they're spreading. You need to come now." Throwing on his coat, he rushed to the eastern grove, his thoughts spinning. He couldn't ignore the eerie synchronicity between the silver creature's presence and the glowing symbols appearing in the forest. Something far larger was unfolding. When Nathan arrived, Sarah was pacing near the grove, her face pale. "It's not just here," she said, pointing to the ground. The glowing crescent moon pattern had multiplied, branching out like veins through the forest floor. "They're appearing all over. Other rangers have found them miles apart, but they're all connected somehow." Nathan knelt and placed his hand over the faintly warm soil. "It's almost like the forest is alive," he muttered, his scientific mind struggling to comprehend. Back at the clinic, the silver creature seemed to sense his unease. Its melodic hum had grown louder, reverberating through the walls like a distant echo. Nathan watched it through the observation window, his chest tight with unease. "You know something, don't you?" he whispered, as if the creature could answer. Its piercing blue eyes locked onto his, and for a brief moment, Nathan felt an emotion that wasn't his own, an overwhelming sadness, almost like grief. The reports from the forest grew stranger. Animals that typically avoided human contact were appearing in broad daylight, moving in uncharacteristic patterns. A group of black bears had gathered near the ranger station, standing silently in a circle as if waiting for something. Sarah called Nathan again, her voice shaking. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "Luna is back. And she's brought the rest of the cubs." Nathan felt his stomach drop. "Where?" he asked. "Right outside your clinic," Sarah replied. Nathan stepped outside cautiously, his breath visible in the crisp morning air. Luna stood there, her massive form dwarfed only by the intensity of her gaze. Behind her, the 4 cubs huddled close, their golden fur glinting in the sun. But it was the 4th cub, the one with the crescent moon mark, that held Nathan's attention. It was glowing faintly now, the light stronger than before. Luna growled low, not out of aggression but urgency. Nathan understood the message clearly. This wasn't just her fight anymore. Whatever was coming, they would have to face it together. Nathan's heart pounded as he faced Luna and her cubs. The tension in the air was almost suffocating, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Luna's growl softened into a low rumble, and her glowing cub stepped forward. Its crescent mark shone brighter with every step, casting faint beams of light onto the ground. The silver creature inside Nathan's clinic began to hum louder, its resonance aligning eerily with the glowing cub's movements. Nathan couldn't ignore the connection anymore. "Luna, what do you want me to do?" Nathan whispered, knowing full well he wouldn't get a verbal answer. Luna stepped closer, her amber eyes locking with his. She lowered her head slightly, almost like a bow, then nudged the glowing cub toward him. It let out a soft whimper, its small body trembling as the light on its chest pulsed. Nathan reached out instinctively, his hand brushing the cub's fur. A shock ran up his arm, and for a brief moment he saw something. A flash of a vast, ancient forest bathed in silver light, with shadows moving through the trees. The vision left Nathan breathless, and he stumbled backward. Sarah arrived just in time to steady him. "Nathan, are you okay?" she asked, her eyes darting between him and Luna. "I think I saw something," he stammered. "A warning. Or maybe a memory. Whatever's happening, it's not just local, it's ancient." Sarah's brow furrowed, but she didn't press him. "The patterns in the forest are spreading faster," she said instead. "And the animals, they're all moving toward one place." Nathan and Sarah followed the ranger's reports to the heart of the forest, where the glowing patterns converged into an enormous symbol etched across a clearing. The crescent moon mark dominated the center, with intricate lines branching outward like a web. Animals of every kind gathered silently around the edges, their collective presence unnerving. Nathan noticed Luna and her cubs had followed them, standing at the clearing's edge like sentinels. The silver creature's hum reached its peak, vibrating so strongly that Nathan's clinic windows shook. "It's like it's calling to something," Sarah said as they returned to the site. Nathan nodded, his pulse racing. He opened the creature's enclosure cautiously, and it stepped out on wobbly legs, its silver fur glowing brighter than ever. It turned its luminous blue eyes toward him, then began walking. Nathan and Sarah followed, hearts heavy with both dread and anticipation. Whatever was happening, they were being led straight into the unknown. The silver creature led Nathan and Sarah through the dense forest, its steps deliberate despite its unsteady gait. Every now and then, it would stop, tilt its head, and hum softly, as if listening to something only it could hear. Behind them, Luna and her cubs followed, their presence strangely comforting. As they approached the clearing where the patterns converged, Nathan noticed the faint glow of the crescent symbols growing stronger, as though responding to the creature's approach. When they arrived, the scene was even more surreal than before. Hundreds of animals stood in eerie silence, their eyes fixed on the massive glowing pattern etched into the ground. The crescent moon at the center pulsed rhythmically, its light now visible even through the dense canopy above. Nathan's breath caught as he realized the light was not just illuminating the clearing, it was stretching upward, forming a faint column that pierced the sky. "What is this?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Nathan shook his head, unable to find an answer. The silver creature walked to the center of the pattern, its fur shimmering like liquid light. It stood there for a moment, then let out a long, melodic hum that seemed to reverberate through the ground. The glowing cub with the crescent mark stepped forward next, standing beside the silver creature. As the two began to hum in unison, the light intensified, and Nathan felt a strange pressure in the air, like the forest was holding its breath. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. The animals remained still, but the humans stumbled, struggling to maintain their balance. Nathan glanced at Sarah, who looked as pale as he felt. "This isn't natural," she said, clutching his arm. "Feels alive." Nathan's mind raced. Could this be the forest itself responding? Or something even older and more powerful? Then, without warning, a brilliant burst of light shot upward from the crescent moon at the center of the pattern. It exploded into the sky, illuminating the forest for miles around. Nathan shielded his eyes, but even through the brightness, he could see shapes forming in the light, vague, shadowy figures that seemed to shift and twist. When the light dimmed, the clearing was silent again, but the air felt charged, as if something monumental had just occurred. Nathan's gaze shifted to the silver creature, now looking at him with an expression that felt almost human. "Whatever this is," he said aloud, "it's just the beginning." The silence that followed the burst of light was suffocating. Nathan's ears rang, and his vision blurred as he tried to process what had just happened. Around him, the forest was still, as if the very trees were waiting for something. The silver creature and the glowing cub stood side by side in the center of the pattern, their eyes reflecting the fading light. Nathan felt a strange pull toward them, an almost magnetic force urging him closer. As he stepped forward, a sudden wave of images filled his mind, fragmented visions of ancient forests, glowing symbols carved into stone, and shadowy figures moving through the trees. Nathan stumbled, clutching his head as the images overwhelmed him. Sarah rushed to his side, gripping his shoulder. "Nathan, what's happening?" she asked, her voice thick with panic. He shook his head, struggling to find words. "I think I'm seeing their memories," he managed to say. "This has happened before long ago." Luna let out a low growl, drawing their attention. She stood at the edge of the clearing, her eyes fixed on the silver creature. Slowly, she approached it, her massive frame dwarfing its smaller, fragile form. To Nathan's astonishment, the silver creature didn't flinch. Instead, it reached out with one delicate paw, touching Luna's muzzle. A faint glow spread from the contact, enveloping both of them in a soft, shimmering light. The sight was both beautiful and unsettling, as if they were part of something far beyond human understanding. Nathan turned to Sarah, his voice urgent. "This isn't just about the forest. It's bigger than that. These creatures, they're connected to something ancient, something we've lost touch with." Sarah frowned, her expression a mix of fear and determination. "If that's true, then why are they here now? What's changed?" Nathan didn't have an answer, but the growing sense of unease in his chest told him they were running out of time to figure it out. As the glow faded, the silver creature turned its gaze toward the forest edge, where the trees seemed to sway unnaturally. The hum returned, softer this time, but more purposeful. Nathan felt it resonate in his chest, pulling him forward like an unspoken command. "It wants us to follow," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah hesitated, glancing at the forest, which now seemed darker and more ominous. "Do we have a choice?" she asked. Nathan shook his head, his eyes locked on the silver creature. "No. Whatever this is, it's not waiting for us to catch up." Nathan and Sarah followed the silver creature as it led them deeper into the forest. The towering trees loomed like silent sentinels, their branches intertwining to block out the moonlight. Only the faint glow from the silver creature and the glowing cub illuminated their path. Behind them, Luna and her other cubs trailed silently, their presence a mix of comfort and foreboding. The air grew colder, heavier, as if they were stepping into a place untouched by time. Every so often, the silver creature would stop, tilting its head as if listening to an inaudible sound. Nathan noticed the ground beneath them had begun to change. The dirt was no longer soft but hard and smooth, almost like polished stone. Strange symbols, similar to the crescents they had seen before, glimmered faintly underfoot, creating a path that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. "It feels like we're walking into a dream," Sarah murmured, her voice barely audible. Suddenly, the hum returned, louder and more resonant than ever. It reverberated through the trees, shaking loose leaves that fell like shimmering embers. Nathan felt it in his chest, a deep vibration that seemed to synchronize with his heartbeat. The silver creature's glow intensified, and its melodic hum transformed into a series of sharp, rhythmic notes. The glowing cub joined in, their combined sound forming a hauntingly beautiful harmony that made Nathan's skin prickle. Ahead, the path ended at a massive stone archway covered in intricate carvings. Symbols Nathan couldn't understand pulsed faintly, their light shifting like liquid gold. The air around the archway seemed to ripple, as if it were a thin veil between two worlds. The silver creature stopped before the arch, turning back to face Nathan and Sarah. Its blue eyes glowed brighter, and Nathan felt an unspoken question pressing into his mind. "It's asking if we're ready," he said aloud, his voice trembling. Sarah hesitated, her hand gripping Nathan's arm. "We don't even know what's on the other side," she said, her fear evident. Nathan took a deep breath, his gaze shifting from the creature to the archway. "We've come this far," he said. "If this is what it's been leading us to, we need to see it through." The silver creature let out one final hum before stepping through the archway. Nathan and Sarah exchanged a look, then followed, Luna and her cubs close behind. As they crossed the threshold, the forest vanished, replaced by a blinding light that engulfed them completely. As the light faded, Nathan blinked, struggling to adjust to his surroundings. They were no longer in the forest. Instead, they stood in a vast, otherworldly landscape. The sky was an endless expanse of shifting colors, like an aurora stretched across the heavens. Strange, crystalline formations jutted from the ground, glowing faintly with the same crescent patterns they had seen in the forest. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, emanating from everywhere and nowhere at once. Sarah clutched Nathan's arm, her eyes wide with wonder and fear. "Where are we?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Nathan shook his head, equally awestruck. "I don't know," he admitted, "but it feels ancient, like we've stepped into something that existed long before us." The silver creature and the glowing cub stood at the edge of a shimmering river that seemed to flow with liquid light. They turned to Nathan and Sarah, their gazes expectant. Luna and her cubs moved forward cautiously, their steps echoing against the crystalline ground. The glowing cub stepped into the river, its crescent mark radiating brighter as it touched the liquid surface. The silver creature followed, and as they both entered the river, the flowing light responded, rising like mist to surround them. Nathan felt a strange pull, a deep, instinctual urge to step closer. "It's calling us," he said, his voice barely audible over the hum. As Nathan and Sarah approached the river, the mist began to take shape, forming ghostly figures that moved gracefully around them. They seemed to be made of light, their forms shifting like smoke in a breeze. One figure stepped forward, its glowing hands outstretched. Nathan hesitated, then reached out tentatively. When his hand made contact, a surge of warmth and images flooded his mind, a story told without words. He saw a civilization that had lived in harmony with nature, their power drawn from the glowing symbols. But something had fractured their world, forcing them to leave a fragment of their legacy behind. The vision faded, and Nathan staggered back, his heart pounding. "They're not just creatures," he said, his voice shaking. "They're messengers. Or guardians. They left this world to protect something, and now they're asking for our help." Sarah's face paled. "Help with what?" she asked. But before Nathan could answer, the silver creature let out a piercing hum, and the crystalline ground beneath their feet began to crack. The river's glow dimmed, and the air grew heavy with tension. Something was coming, and it wasn't friendly. The ground shook beneath their feet as the shimmering river began to churn, the once peaceful flow now rippling with violent energy. The ghostly figures surrounding them flickered, their forms distorting into chaotic flashes of light. Nathan stumbled backward, his heart racing. "What's happening?" Sarah gasped, clutching Nathan's arm tightly. "I don't know," he said, his voice tight with panic. "But whatever this is, it's waking up." The silver creature and the glowing cub moved toward the center of the river, their forms now radiating a brilliant light. The mist around them thickened, swirling like a storm, as if responding to their presence. The hum intensified, growing deeper, more resonant, almost like the sound of 1,000 voices echoing through time. Nathan watched in awe and fear as the figures in the mist began to solidify, their glowing forms taking on more distinct shapes. Then, as if summoned by the intensity of the moment, a massive, shadowy figure emerged from the depths of the river. It was unlike anything Nathan had ever seen, tall, imposing, and covered in ancient runes that pulsed with dark energy. The figure's eyes glowed a fiery red, and its presence seemed to warp the very fabric of reality around it. A cold, suffocating presence filled the air, and Nathan felt a chill run down his spine. The silver creature and the glowing cub stood firm, their light dimming slightly in the face of the approaching figure. Luna growled low, stepping forward protectively, but Nathan could see the fear in her eyes. This wasn't a creature of the forest. This was something far older and more powerful, a force that had been dormant for eons, now reawakening. The shadowy figure raised one arm, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The air around them crackled with raw energy as the hum reached a deafening pitch. Nathan's vision blurred as a wave of memories flooded his mind. He saw the past, the rise of this dark force and the fall of the civilization that had once lived in harmony with the glowing symbols. But he also saw something else, a prophecy, an ancient warning that only the chosen could prevent the darkness from consuming the world once again. "Nathan," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "What do we do now?" Nathan didn't have an answer. The creature in front of them was more powerful than anything they had ever faced, and yet he knew they had no choice. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the moment the world's fate would be decided. The shadowy figure loomed before them, its fiery red eyes locking onto Nathan and Sarah. The atmosphere was thick with tension, every breath feeling heavier than the last. The silver creature stepped forward, its glow weakening, but its resolve unwavering. The glowing cub at its side let out a low, harmonious hum, the sound vibrating through the ground like a call to action. It was as though the creature was offering a challenge, as if it knew the battle was inevitable. The air pulsed with energy, and the ground beneath them cracked open. From the fissures, dark tendrils of energy began to emerge, reaching toward the sky, their presence suffocating the light around them. Nathan's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the darkness encroaching, overwhelming the very life force of the realm they stood in. "We need to stop it," Sarah said, her voice low but determined. "But how?" Nathan shook his head, not sure what to do, but he felt the weight of the silver creature's gaze on him. He had a sudden, inexplicable clarity. The prophecy, the ancient warning, the symbols, they weren't just markings, they were a key, a way to unlock the power needed to fight the darkness. He glanced around, seeing the same crescent symbols glowing faintly on the crystal formations, in the sky, on the river's surface. The silver creature, the glowing cub, Luna, all of them were connected to this force. "We have to activate the symbols," he said, his voice firm. "Together, they'll create the energy we need to stop this." Sarah nodded, though fear still lingered in her eyes. She stepped forward, standing beside Nathan as they reached for the closest symbol. The moment their hands made contact, a wave of energy surged through them, their bodies illuminated by the same light that radiated from the glowing cub and silver creature. The symbols responded, their glow intensifying, resonating with the energy they had just unlocked. The darkness recoiled, but the shadowy figure did not falter. It raised its hand once more, sending a shockwave of dark energy toward them. Luna let out a ferocious roar, her massive form charging forward with the force of a storm. The glowing cub joined in, its light now blinding, its hum an unrelenting force. Nathan and Sarah stood their ground, holding their hands to the symbol as the energy built around them. The silver creature joined them, its light merging with theirs. In that moment, everything aligned. The symbols, the creatures, and the power of the forest itself. The air crackled, and a brilliant surge of energy erupted, sending a wave of pure light crashing toward the shadowy figure. The darkness screamed in fury, its red eyes flashing before the light consumed it completely. The earth trembled violently, and for a moment, Nathan feared they hadn't won. But then, as the light faded, the shadow was gone. The river's glow returned, now a soft, peaceful shimmer, and the once suffocating atmosphere lightened. The air was still again, and the mist that had surrounded them began to dissipate, leaving behind a calm, serene landscape. Nathan collapsed to his knees, his body drained, but a sense of relief washed over him. The battle was over. They had stopped the darkness. Sarah knelt beside him, her face filled with exhaustion and awe. "We did it," she whispered, her voice trembling. Nathan nodded, his heart still racing, but a smile slowly spread across his face. The world had been saved, this realm, and the one they had left behind. The prophecy had been fulfilled. The silver creature and its cubs approached, their forms now peaceful, their purpose complete. The connection they had forged with the ancient power had restored balance. As Nathan looked around at the serene landscape, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had been part of something larger than himself, something timeless. And though the forest had returned to its quiet state, he knew this was only the beginning of a new chapter. The world was different now, and so were they.